The Minnesota House of Representatives Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform will come to order. The clerk will take the roll.
Chair Mariani.
Present.
Vice Chair Frazier.
Present.
Lead Johnson.
Present.
Edelson.
Present.
Feist.
Present.
Grosso. Excused. Hollins.
Present.
Hewitt.
Present.
Cleburne.
Present.
Long.
Present.
Lucero.
Unfortunately, the groundhog saw his shadow today.
Mueller.
Present.
Novotny.
Present.
O'Neill.
Present.
Pinto.
Present.
Poston. Poston. Raleigh.
Raleigh present.
Vang.
Present.
Zhang.
Present.
That concludes the roll.
Very well, members. I do believe we have a quorum. This hearing is, being conducted remotely on an electronic platform pursuant to Minnesota House Rule 10.01, Emergency House Operations, in response to the COVID-19 infectious disease pandemic requiring public health exercise of social distancing. The public can find House Rule 10.01 on the House website, and for further information about accessing live stream as well as participating and testifying from the public, you'll find that information on this committee webpage on the Minnesota House website. Thank you, Tara, for pinch hitting today. I appreciate it. Members know that our own committee, legislative assistant has been out ill for several days, so continued well wishes and healing thoughts for Caitlin. Members, I am mindful that we have not adopted our minutes for, I think, 3 meetings. So just to let you know that I'm mindful of that. Obviously, we're dealing with a few logistical issues. That's typically the clerk's duty. I'll see if we can get those caught up at our next committee hearing. As for today, members, we're going to be hearing 2 bills. House File 445, which the chair is authoring. And then we had scheduled to hear, and I'm pulling up the number here very quickly, Representative Gomez's bill on civilian oversight. And where is the number? Oh, I don't have a number yet. And there's some technical issues with the language of that. So I believe our intent today will be to really have an informational hearing. This is a bill we've heard before. At least members who have been on this committee before have heard before. And then we'll circle back at the subsequent hearing to finish that and then to act on it as well. Members, I've asked our Vice Chair, Representative Frazier, to assume the gavel while I present House File 445. And so at this point, I can't physically hand you my gavel, Representative Frazier, which, by the way, is merely a heavy, a piece of office equipment that I have in my office to make that hanging sound. But hopefully you have something similarly heavy nearby as well. So Representative Frazier, if you would be so kind.
Thank you, Chair. Would you like to move to refer House File 445 to the Ways and Means Committee?
That would be my motion. I so move, Chair.
So moved. We now have House File 445 before the committee. Chair, you may proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Representative Chair Frazier. Members, what I want to do is talk about the bill itself. We'll move to some testimony about that, and then there are amendments that I'd like us to take up as well. And I hope we have a good time to have a good conversation on this. Members, House File 445 creates a state contingency fund similar to our present state disaster fund to reimburse local communities for providing needed public safety through mutual aid agreements in response to critical incidents of public assemblies. It could be other critical incidents as well that can overwhelm the resources of a single community. Excuse me. The governor prepared this proposal in recognition of the challenges that local governments face in protecting the constitutional First Amendment rights of citizens to publicly assemble free from harm in large-scale manner. There should be no doubt in anyone's mind of the highest priority to the state to ensure that our citizens exercise that right and our priority duty that no harm comes to people and property in the course of exercising it. This bill and the amendments I have crafted seek to emphasize those two, what I believe are inseparable and mutually reinforcing priorities. The bill funds law enforcement. It funds law enforcement overtime and staffing costs in order to incentivize cooperative work through mutual aid agreements. The bill establishes a special revenue fund for called the State Aid for Emergencies Fund, so SAFE, for the Commissioner of Public Safety to reimburse requests arising from mutual aid agreements. It establishes criteria for that. It establishes reimbursement rates. It establishes a process for reimbursement. It transfers $35 million from the general fund to the SAFE account in FY 2020 this year. My amendments further incentives for collaboration. We'll get to that when we pull up the amendment. My amendments also build accountability measures to ensure First Amendment rights. My amendment empowers public assembly crowd, quote unquote, crowd control to use co-responder personnel as additional tools for maintaining safety. My amendments increase learning by law enforcement for public assembly management and increasing public trust and understanding of law enforcement processes to meet the twin goals of personal safety and constitutional rights. Members, with that, I'll stop and ask Commissioner Harrington to come forward. I think he will be accompanied, I think perhaps by Colonel Langer as well, if they can come forward to testify on behalf of the executive branch for House File 445.
Thank you, Chair. We'll have the two testifiers please come before the committee, state your name for the record, and we'll take your testimony.
Chair Frazier, I'm John Harrington. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your committee today on behalf of the Governor's Office and the Department of Public Safety on House File 445. This legislation offers a solution to an urgent matter related to public safety. It began with calls I received from local police asking about funding and support for their departments last summer. And I think it's important to remember that Department of Public Safety and the State Patrol have responded to riotous situations, these kind of situations, not just in the Twin Cities, but also we responded to looting in West St. Paul. We responded to arsons in Lakeville. We responded to vandalism in St. Cloud. So this is really a very much more than just a Twin Cities issue. This is a statewide issue. And I can tell you that every day I watch for the protests that are happening all over the state of Minnesota, where we are asking local law enforcement to partner together to provide a suitable response. I can tell you that the State Patrol and DPS are committed to protecting and preserving the constitutional rights of everybody. And this includes that freedom of speech. As we daily see these protests all over the state, we think this conversation and this bill is both timely and essential as the local law enforcement are being asked to step in to protect First Amendment rights. It's not lost on me that during the riots last year and during several of the insurrections and things that we've seen all over the country, that the voices of the community were not heard because of the mob. And that is what silenced their voices. It's not local law enforcement. It has been, in fact, the fires that were raging, the sounds of the alarms going off that police had to respond to. That, as much as anything, has silenced the voices of the community. And we are here to make sure that the voices of the community can be heard. As part of Unified Command's Department of Public Safety is now well into preparations for riot prevention and response. And we want to remind you that the Chauvin trial, which is slated to begin on March 8th, is only 34 days away from jury selection. As I've been saying to fire and police chiefs and the sheriffs, we need to work together to make sure that safety and order is maintained in the metro region and across the state. And when I say we, I don't just mean public safety officials and DPS or even the local law enforcement officials and the fire officials, but I really do mean, and we've been trying to have this conversation with local elected officials and you, the legislature. As you know, under normal circumstances, public safety is managed by local law enforcement. My 40-year history, St. Paul, Transit, and other places, few events have required multi-jurisdictional response of a sustained nature. The only ones that come to my mind are the Republican National Convention, which we oversaw here in St. Paul, the Super Bowl in Minneapolis, and the All-Star Games. And in those cases, multi-jurisdictional groups were put together, but they were either appropriated by the federal government or they were funded by a Super Bowl committee or an All-Star committee that helped support the local LEOs being ability to send their cops to another jurisdiction for a sustained period of time. In those exceptional cases, the fact that there was a funding source and that there were rules of engagement that could be agreed upon because we had plans years in advance were essential to getting people to come together. And I can tell you that even with the money, having run the RNC, getting people to come together was still not the easiest thing in the world. The DPS team has had many discussions with local jurisdictions, large and small, as we've done our planning efforts related to the March trial. And those planning efforts have included requests for state personnel and for resources. Those discussions have identified three critical points that the local law enforcement officials, the chiefs and sheriffs, say are barriers to their willingness to provide proactive mutual aid. What I've heard from them over and over again is if it's burning, if we are in crisis, they will come. And what we're saying to them is we want them to come before that so that it doesn't start burning and so that we can prevent the damage and we can prevent the looting. We want to get out ahead of this, not be in a reactive mode. The 3 points that they bring up are liability, the political rhetoric that's out there, and then a stable vehicle for reimbursement for the weeks of work from last May, June, and the work that we're asking them again to take on as we prepare for trials in Minneapolis in both March and in August. It's aid that many of them have said to me no longer feels very mutual. When you're coming from greater Minnesota, from the far northern parts of Cook, and you're coming to help Minneapolis out, it's hard for them to envision how Minneapolis is ever going to end up in Cook in a mutual aid situation. The state has worked hard to put together this safe account program that will answer those questions and others about mutual aid. I'll ask Colonel Langer to actually walk through the specifics of the legislation, but I will tell you that in my mind, this was a natural counterpart to the Homeland Security Emergency Manager Disaster Contingency Account. It's an account that, much like SAFE, we hope never to use, but it's a vital insurance policy for local governments to know that if the worst case happens, that there will be a resource at the state that will help them respond, react, and overcome. I want to stress that this isn't the only issue that we're trying to confront in this case to be a successful outcome. As we look at the history of LA and Baltimore and other cities that have had riots following these kinds of trials, there are many lessons that we've learned. And this bill, I believe, is a very important and very timely element in demonstrating that Minnesota has learned from history and is committed to both public safety and not repeating it. Thank you.
Thank you for that testimony. Could we please have the second testifier come before the committee and present your name, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Matt Langer. I have the honor and privilege of serving as Chief Colonel of the Minnesota State Patrol, and I'm prepared to briefly walk through the legislation and what it does, if you'd be so kind as to allow me.
You may.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I'll expand a bit on what Commissioner Harrington said, maybe more specifically on what this language actually does. As the Commissioner articulated and the Chair Mariani presented, it's a state aid for emergencies account, the SAFE account. It's basically an appropriation with the correct language attached to it that would allow local units of government to be reimbursed for their aid when so called upon to help in a different jurisdiction. There are some guardrails that are put around this language with intent to make sure that it specifically addresses only what the appropriation is meant to pay for. And quite frankly, the bulk of that is personnel. It's overtime costs, it's lodging, it's incidentals, it's the things that go above and beyond that can be budget breaking or budget stressing for sending jurisdictions when they go help in a receiving jurisdiction. Before I get to the reimbursement piece, I should point out that one of the other guardrails put around this is that it requires the declaration of a local emergency by the local elected officials at the scene. That's with intent. So it's not just a one-person proclamation that this is an emergency, therefore we need to be able to use the funds available in SAFE account. It would be covered under EMAC as well. So if the governor were to declare an emergency and request assistance from other states that are bringing resources to Minnesota, it allows for the reimbursement of their costs if they come here and help in that emergency. Quite frankly, what we've done is tried to figure out a way to cover a gap that we identified after May and June, and it was a pretty significant gap in that a lot of agencies came to assist in Minneapolis, either at my request or the request of others. And then after they came, when that call for help went out, they got back to their communities and have realized that there's not a streamlined or solidified mechanism to reimburse them for their expenses. And so although we can talk a lot about the city of Minneapolis and the response in May and June and the predicted response we'll have during the two upcoming trials, as the commissioner mentioned, this is a statewide application that could be used anywhere in Minnesota for any purpose that fits within the confines of the definition under this proposed legislation. Eligible applicants are counties and the cities of the first class, as well as law enforcement agencies and those responding, as I said, from other states. Again, the eligible costs are overtime costs, travel expenses, food and lodging, as well as incidental supplies. That's specifically listed as the things that are able to be applied for reimbursement. The reimbursement for both the sending agency and the receiving agency is made by application to the Department of Public Safety, and the Department of Public Safety would then reimburse those accounts after the commissioner reviews those application materials and deems it to be appropriate within the legislation. And the receiving jurisdiction, their costs are slightly less. They're reimbursed at a percentage versus the sending jurisdiction. Those agencies going to help someone else are made whole. I'll reiterate, the thing that keeps me up at night right now is we're just 30 some days out from jury selection is there's still a mutual aid need within the city of Minneapolis. The State Patrol and National Guard, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, many others are working full time right now and have been to plan accordingly for that period of time in our state's history. There's still a need for a mutual aid, and it's a real need. And as the commissioner articulated, there are a few reasons that are being brought up as impediments towards securing that mutual aid in advance. This legislation aims to solve at least one of those. Mr. Chair, that's an explanation from my point of view.
Thank you, Colonel Langer. I see that we also have folks signed up for public testimony. Could the public testifier please step forward and state your name for the record and provide your testimony? Do we have a Grace Waltz?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee. My name is Grace Waltz. I am the Vice President of Public Policy at the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, and I'm here to speak in support of swift funding of the governor's proposed state aid for emergencies account. We wish to support our local leaders at the state and local level who are determined to be well prepared as we approach the March 8th trial of Derek Chauvin. And we feel that providing local law enforcement with proper funding and flexibility will ensure our communities are safe and secure. As we know, more than 1,500 businesses were damaged in the civil unrest following the killing of George Floyd. This comes as businesses were already dealt a significant blow with the economic ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, the hardest hit areas of the Twin Cities are home to many immigrant and Black-owned businesses that have historically struggled to access financial capital. Unfortunately, these are the same communities and business owners that have already been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our business community, particularly small businesses, need our collective support now more than ever. In order to protect our communities and businesses from further devastation, we believe it is vitally important that we are proactive, well-coordinated, and doing everything we can to work through potential issues prior to March. We feel this is bigger than just Minneapolis, and we will need more than just the resources within Minneapolis to respond. The Minneapolis Regional Chamber looks forward to working with the legislature and partners across the region and state on this vitally important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Waltz. And I believe that the other testifier, Sheriff Christopher Clark from Asante County, has withdrawn for testimony. Is that correct?
This is Representative Brian Johnson. He contacted me and he had some things come up and he could not make it.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Appreciate that. All right, so members, we have a number of amendments. I will allow some time for discussion. We'll limit it to 5 minutes for this underlying bill discussion, but we do have a number of amendments, so I'm going to hold us to that 5 minutes. So please be mindful of that when you give your comments, and then I will take we have O'Neill, Johnson, and Riley up for questions. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Initially, I have a question for Colonel Langer, and then I have a follow-up question for Commissioner Harrington. And I'll just ask them both to be expedient. Commissioner, first, Colonel Langer, you had said that receiving jurisdictions can get 75% reimbursement. I'm understanding that to be like state agencies, right? So like State Patrol, DNR, that they could receive up to 75% reimbursement. I believe that's true. And if that's not accurate, maybe you could just correct that. And then my second question is for Commissioner Harrington. Given that state agencies like DNR and State Patrol, I believe, can receive up to 75% of their expenses because they are a receiving jurisdiction, and you are going to be deciding who gets the payments, but this is supposed to prioritize our local law enforcement agencies. How are you going to prioritize local law enforcement? Is this a first come, first serve? Are you going to have a ranking? It seems like 35 million would disappear very quickly if some of it's going to the State Patrol, some of it's going to the DNR and other state agencies, and then also to local law enforcement. And we just did a bill that was 11 million just to State Patrol. So I'm just curious as to how you're going to prioritize all of that. Thank you.
Colonel Langer.
Mr. Chair and Representative O'Neill, the first answer to your question is the receiving jurisdiction gets 75% of their overtime costs. So if the city of Cottage Grove requests assistance from the State Patrol, the city of Cottage Grove would get 75% of their costs covered, but whatever agency comes to assist them would be made whole. And so it's really meant that the receiving jurisdictions are those local authorities across Minnesota. I suppose the State Patrol could be a receiving jurisdiction at the state capitol, or if we asked for help on the freeway. But the 75% versus 100% was contemplated with the mindset that local government should and it can and should be involved with preparedness in their community, and that they should have ownership over that. And it shouldn't be just making them whole basically because they requested assistance, that they should have to contemplate that they do have a match of 25% that they're going to have borne upon themselves and not reimbursed. So hopefully that answers at least the first part of your question.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you. I'm sure there's a lot of opportunities where DNR, State Patrol, and other state agencies will either be receiving or providing support. So I guess the rest of the question would be to Commissioner Harrington on how is he going to prioritize? Is it first come, first serve, or how are we going to run this fund? And what happens if it's deficient?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Neill, our plan has been to work through the Homeland Security and Emergency Management process that we've used for natural disasters. And so just as natural disasters come in a chronological order, we would fund applications as they come in based on chronology, but we would also have Homeland Security and Emergency Management help to work with the local EMs to make sure that what they're asking for, in fact, fits within the definition of the statute. And so we expect that just as we do when there's a flood or there's a windstorm, there will be some form of negotiation with the locals and say, this is allowable, this is not allowable, but it would be based chronologically in terms of when the disasters happen, that we would be taking them in that order. That is as far as we've gotten into the planning at this point. I do not expect that the state would be the primary recipient of this, because typically when we are called in, it has been related to our basic purpose, whether it is freeway protests or guarding the Capitol, which is our primary jurisdiction. In those cases where we have had to incur overtime because we've had to protect the Capitol or incurred overtime because of a freeway protest, that is part of our regular duty. And I do not see that as being something we would see this fund as a resource for.
Thank you, Commissioner Harrington. Members, we are at our time, so I'm going to move us along. But other members, I will try to circle back if we have time to circle back. And Commissioner and Colonel, could you please hang around if we get to that time so you can take more questions? I appreciate that. Thank you. So I believe we have some amendments. Author, would someone like to move House File 445, Amendment 1 forward, please?
Mr. Chair, is this the A4 amendment you're asking for?
No, this is the A1 amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hold us up. Mr. Chair, yes, I would move the A1 amendment.
So moved.
Mr. Chair, members, the A1 amendment has 4 components to it. The first component is addresses the part of the bill that speaks of eligible costs, and it adds a category of eligible costs related to the mitigation of public health. I don't need to tell anyone here we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so being able to do this work in a way that advances public health is going to be both incredibly challenging, but also incredibly important and probably costly. The other part of that basically is to be able to capture the ability of our local law enforcement to utilize co-responders in meeting their duties with the public. So these are folks that are not subject to overtime because they're in relationship with separately from the law enforcement entity as, say, mental health counselors, for instance. So that's the first component. The second component also speaks to eligible costs. And this component, members came from the chair, reached out Friday, the end of last week, to the various law enforcement associations to get their advice and their thoughts around the bill. One of the issues that came up was this issue of indemnification. So there's concern on the part of locals of incurring liabilities as they send their officers over to an adjoining district where perhaps things are done differently, there's different dynamics, et cetera. So the language here would add to eligible costs the indemnification for sending jurisdictions if such indemnification is required or if it's agreed to. And typically my understanding is that these are conversations that come up in the construction of the mutual aid agreement. Members, what we're trying to do here is to further incentivize the collaboration that we're hearing from public safety experts is important to have. The third element speaks to the issue of the state making sure that it has a presence as decisions are being made in carrying out the public safety exercise. And so this language would allow the commissioner, it's permissive, doesn't require, but allows the commissioner to deny reimbursement to the receiving jurisdiction. So that's that's always going to be the jurisdiction at the center. The receiving jurisdiction, if it refuses to allow the state, the commissioner, to observe, if it refuses to allow to observe, or refuses to receive offers of advice or counsel. This language is very carefully crafted. We didn't want to get to the point of refusing assistance for refusing to carry out the advice. There's a fine balance here with local, law enforcement being able to make those important calls. The whole point is that the state needs to be present and aware of decisions. Members, $35 million of state funds. We should always, no matter what area of law we're involved in, make sure that there is a minimal accountability, transparency, function and role for the state as they safeguard our resources. And then the final piece, members, adds an after-action review, and it spells out how that would happen. It lists examples of minimal things that would be reviewed. We also adjusted some of those as we interacted with law enforcement to make sure that we're striking the right kind of balance of information being gathered. And the purpose here is so that, the review would then be, it's incumbent on the receiving jurisdiction to prepare. However, the review would be conducted by an independent party, so not one of their employees. And the purpose, members, is to learn. Every time a major event happens, there's something to learn. We're fortunate we've got law enforcement in the state that constantly adjusts to that. Again, with state resources on the line directly, we want to make sure that there is this constant process of analyzing, learning, and then sharing that learning with the public through this language, through the Pulse Board itself. It's important, members, I would argue, to keep the public's trust with all our public safety and law enforcement efforts, particularly when it involves these First Amendment issues. And so I believe that this kind of transparency done responsibly is a way in which we can enhance the effectiveness of the public to have that trust. So members, that's the A1 amendment, and stand for any questions and urge your support.
Thank you, Chair. I see we have a number of amendments to this amendment, so I'll open up discussion on this amendment. And again, I'll be moving us along to make sure we get to the other amendments that are out there. Representative Johnson.
Chair Frazier, I'd like to move the amendment to this amendment so we can actually talk about the amendment, if that is okay.
Very well.
This is the A1 amendment to the amendment. It's a minor amendment, or I believe it's the A4 amendment.
A4.
A4. This simply removes one word from the amendment of Chair Mariani. On line 1.17, it removes the word not. The A1 amendment says that if a jurisdiction that receives assistance for a public safety event does not follow or implement the Commissioner of Public Safety's advice or counsel, the Commissioner may not deny reimbursement to the receiving jurisdiction. My A1 amendment simply allows the Commissioner to deny reimbursement if the receiving jurisdiction does not follow or implement the Commissioner's wise advice and counsel. His counsel might have ended up saving property or even saving lives, but if the receiving jurisdiction refuses to follow or even consider that advice, I think that should be brought up into the reimbursement because it could have caused more damage and more costs. So all the amendment does, it says the commissioner, the amendment does not say it shall deny, but it can actually just consider those and in the reimbursement process. Like I say, in case because of not following the advice or counsel, there's much more damage or much more expense because of lack of considering the recommendations.
Thank you. Chair Mariani.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if the administration will wish to respond, to this. If we do have law enforcement here, it might be helpful to hear from them as well.
Do we have law enforcement or Commissioner Harrington or Colonel Langley? Would you like to respond?
So Commissioner Harrington, I'd be happy to respond.
Commissioner Harrington.
Chair Frazier, Representative Johnson, Representative Mariani. I believe this could provide or could pose a real impediment to our ability to respond. In this case with the Chauvin trial, we are in planning stage, so we have advance notice. But in most cases, these protests and the riots we've had have happened spontaneously. And so the opportunity for advice and consent prior to an event is, in most cases, non-existent. I believe that would be a real challenge to local law enforcement feeling like they could apply for this if they were to have started an operation and had no time because they were in the midst of it to actually consult with the Department of Public Safety. I believe their law enforcement, the sheriff's associations or other may have also other concerns with this.
Chair Mariani.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if the sheriffs or the chiefs are here. If they are, I would certainly welcome them to come forward to comment on this.
Chair Mariani?
Sheriff, well, the chair will have to call.
Sheriff Hutton, please.
Chair Frazier, thank you very much. Chair Mariani and representatives, Representative Johnson, thanks for the concern. I would also echo what the commissioner said. Another concern that came forward, as we heard last week from Sheriff Habel, is we know our community. So absolutely, we would expect and we would hope that Colonel Langer would be there, and we would hope that the commissioner would be there, or at least representative from commissioner would be there, and they do an exceptional job. The concern would be that a local sheriff will have better connections with his or her community and know them better. So maybe some of the advice would not be something that they would be interested based on solely on the relationships.
Chair Mariani.
Mr. Chair, members, you've heard from the Commissioner of Public Safety, you've heard from Sheriff Hutton on this. I do think the language that Representative Johnson has constructed would set up a situation where you do have denying of reimbursement based simply on the receiving jurisdiction refusing to carry out whatever advice or even hearing advice. What we tried to do is strike a very important moderate line or place to make sure that our law enforcement entities can operate effectively. At the same time that we want to make sure the state is present. This goes beyond that. Part of me, quite frankly, Mr. Chair, would like to embrace this because I do believe it's important to have a strong state presence, absolutely, especially with state resources. At the same time, there is incredible wisdom in a unified command structure that creates a collegial relationship that we're seeking to reinforce with our with our present language. And unfortunately, this amendment would disturb that balance. I don't think law enforcement would welcome it, and so I'd ask members not to support the amendment.
Representative Johnson.
Chair Fraser, Chair Mariani. I would ask to support this because what this does, it actually requires the receiving or the jurisdiction that's in charge to actually consider and listen to others that have experience in these issues. Others times it might be in a jurisdiction that's never had to deal with a riot and that does not know how to properly place things in place. Or the Commissioner Harrington or Colonel Langer, who's unfortunately had to deal with them down in Minneapolis for a week of riots. They have an understanding how it works and understand how to where placement and where supplies and where manpower needs to be placed just because of their experience. And where the lack of using that experience could cause more damage. This by removing that, it makes it so the jurisdiction that's having the issue is more willing to and more open to ideas that can actually resolve the issues quicker.
Very well. So we have Rep. Johnson moves to amend A1 amendment with the A4 amendment. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mariani,
No.
Mariani, nay. Fraser,
No.
Fraser, nay. Johnson,
Aye.
Johnson, aye. Edelson,
No.
Edelson, nay. Feist,
Nay.
Feist, nay. Grossel, excused. Hollins,
Nay.
Hollins, nay. Hewitt,
Nay.
Hewitt, nay. Cleburne,
Nay.
Cleburne, nay. Long,
No.
Long, nay. Lucero,
Lucero, no.
Lucero, nay. Mueller,
Mueller, no.
Mueller, no. Novotny,
Novotny, aye.
Novotny, aye. O'Neill,
Oh, no.
O'Neill,
Neil, no.
O'Neill, nay. Pinto,
No.
Pinto, nay. Poston,
Aye.
Poston, aye. Raleigh,
Raleigh, aye.
Raleigh, aye. Vang,
No.
Vang, nay. Jean,
Lucero changes from no to yes.
Lucero, aye. Zhang,
No.
Zhang, nay. 5 ayes, 13 nays, 1 absent.
So a vote of 13 nays and 5 ayes and 1 absent, the A1 amendment is not adopted. Thank you, Clerk.
The A4 amendment.
The A4 amendment, I'm sorry, the A4 amendment is not adopted. Thank you, Chair. I see there is another amendment, Amendment A5. Would anyone like to offer the amendment A5?
Mr. Chair, I offer that amendment.
Thank you, Representative Pinto. Please provide explanation of your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, the A5 amendment expands the situations in which there can be reimbursement under the fund to include just a small set of situations that I hope we all would agree with. These are situations where the State Patrol is protecting a state-owned facility, such as the Capitol, but others as well, of course, and receive support. The circumstance has to be an unplanned or extraordinary circumstance is the phrasing that is in that's already in the bill, and this simply pulls that in as well. And there has to be a specific request for assistance. But when you have a state facility having this unplanned or extraordinary situation, State Patrol says that assistance is needed in that situation. We do, it seems to me, members want to make sure that there is state support for the local law enforcement response in that unusual circumstance. I can provide other explanation, but I think that probably summarizes that well. And maybe just note that one particular motivation for me as a member from St. Paul is just the many circumstances we've seen, which would not all apply in this with this proposal, but where our local police department has been called to respond to the Capitol, other places when there is much going on. And we know that if there's an unplanned or extraordinary circumstance, and again, it could be in other facilities as well around the state, we do want to make sure there's state support for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Pinto. Chair Mariani?
Mr. Chair, just if I may, I think I know the answer, but just a quick question on the record of my colleague, Representative Pinto. Representative Pinto, does the A5 amendment, it obviously adds this particular, circumstances, where state interests, property are involved. But does the language do anything more than add? In other words, does it deconstruct the underlying framework for the mutual aid reimbursement processes that were identified in the original bill?
Mr. Chair and Chair Mariani, the answer is no, it does not deconstruct any of that. The bill is built upon what's called a public safety event, quote unquote. The bill and the author's amendment, as you have, Mr. Chair, has a series of circumstances. This is simply another way that there can be a, quote, public safety event. And then everything else that's contained in the bill certainly applies in all those circumstances. To the percentages, the checks, all those other things all still stay in place.
Okay, very well. Thank you, Representative Pinto. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm favorable to this amendment. I think it's an important addition.
Thank you, Chair. Are there any members that have any questions specific to this amendment? Representative Johnson, it looks like you're trying to talk, but you're muted.
I do just have one question about this. I understand it, and I don't have a real problem with it. But currently, the governor has called a emergency under 12.31, and the State Patrol is here down at the Capitol in full force. I'm wondering if the author would clarify if, because we're under at emergency under 12.31 at this time, and the State Patrol are down here and have used, if this fund would end up reimbursing the State Patrol's 75% of their costs while they've been down here since the emergency has been called until the emergency is lifted.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Johnson, you make a good point about the emergency, there being a state of emergency in general. That'd be under the main language of the proposal. Under this amendment, there would actually be no requirement for a state of emergency in the sense that if you've got this unplanned or extraordinary situation, the State Patrol is making a specific request, then there can be that reimbursement. I guess that it could be that there would be the 75% for the State Patrol, but we'd have to look at how it would work in the rest of the bill. But the setup here is simply to say that if the State Patrol is in fact making a specific request for assistance from that local government in the unplanned or extraordinary circumstance, we want to make sure that there is in fact state support going there. It probably is going to have to work through the rest of it then, as far as the requesting jurisdiction is concerned.
Thank you, Representative Pinto. Representative Johnson?
Yes. The reason I asked that, because I have concern, because the State Patrol is in charge, but then they've also requested mutual aid from DNR, their conservation officers. And they've been down here quite a bit since we've been in session. And the governor has declared an emergency under 12.31. It just doesn't really, going through the bill, it doesn't really specify that it has to be that particular event. It just says where a state of emergency is declared, and which we have. So I just want to make sure that it's going to be used the proper way, and that the funds aren't used in a way they're not intended to. So I'll end it there.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. I will now take the call for the vote. Clerk, please take the vote.
Mariani,
Aye.
Frazier,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Edelson,
Aye.
Weist,
Aye.
Grosso, excused, Collins,
Aye.
Hewitt,
Aye.
Claiborne,
Aye.
Long,
Aye.
Lucero,
Yes.
Mueller,
Aye.
Novotny,
Aye.
O'Neill,
Aye.
Pinto,
Aye.
Poston,
Aye.
Raleigh,
Aye.
Vang,
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
18 ayes, 0 nays, 1 excused.
With 18 ayes and 0 nays and 1 excuse, the A5 amendment to the A5 amendment to the A1 amendment is adopted. Thank you, Clerk. I see that we also have an Amendment 6. Would anyone like to move Amendment 6 forward?
Mr. Chair, I would move the A6 amendment.
Mr. Chair, would you please describe Amendment A6?
Mr. Chair, members, the A6 amendment has two elements, it's, in my opinion, very important. And I wanted to make sure that we had a conversation distinct to these elements, and that's why I didn't build it into my A1 amendment. The A6 amendment elements are: one, it calls for the post board, Peace Officer Standards Training Board, which is our peace officer law enforcement licensing entity. It calls for the post to develop a model policy on public assembly responses for guidance to all law enforcement agencies. This would be prepared through consultation with community advisors, and we list who those are here, as well as the three major professional associations of our state's law enforcement community. The model policy is expected to, required to be developed by December of 2021. The other part of that is that it then requires all state and local law enforcement agencies to establish and enforce a policy similar to the post-board developed model policy and public assembly response. Members, if this looks familiar, it's because we followed the same process that we expected and required of the post-board in preparing its sexual assault investigations policy, which I believe was developed 2 years ago. And I believe all law enforcement entities now have adopted those. So that's the first part of the amendment. The second part requires that any peace officer who does not comply with his or her own department's public assembly response policy is in violation of the standards of conduct pursuant to post licensing. So there's a code of conduct as a standard embedded in our licensing. this would say that a violation of existing policy. We're not talking about new. I know we're creating, the model policy, but that's going to take a while. In the meantime, we do have a diversity of policies that speak to this issue of public assembly response. And so with the state on the hook for, upwards of $35 million to ensure a balanced, good, strong, effective public assembly response on the part of law enforcement, the accountability measure for the immediate term is to hold our peace officers accountable to their own department's policy. And so therefore, if they violate those policies, they would then be subject to post-board action through their license. As I said at the very beginning of all this, there are two high priorities for the state to ensure in providing for public safety for public assemblies. That personal property and the person not be harmed, and that the constitutional First Amendment rights be guaranteed. The overall underlying bill addresses that first part. This amendment goes straight to the issue of those First Amendment constitutional rights. And members, I have to say, I can't imagine anyone, I certainly can't imagine law enforcement, thinking that the state post-licensing board would not use its licensing power to protect First Amendment constitutional rights. This goes to the essence of who we are, I would argue, as a free people, and what we should expect of all of our public agents. And so, members, I would encourage your support for this important amendment to this bill.
Thank you, Chair. I did notice a few hands that shot up when we were discussing this amendment, so I will call on those individuals. And other members, I will call on you if we have time after that before we get to the vote. Representative Feist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Mariani, I was curious if you had a chance to discuss this particular amendment with the law enforcement associations, and if so, I would like to know what their position was. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Feist, for that question. I have tried to, in the course of my tenure of this committee, to reach out to all sorts of interests in particular, especially law enforcement. Prior to COVID, it would not be unusual to have found any of them sitting in my office for long conversations. I must admit that we didn't always agree. We probably mostly didn't, but the point is that we did. We did have an open door for that. Let me just say that I think that, and we should ask them, frankly. Hopefully they're here. They didn't respond earlier, but I think they're good with the underlying amendment here. This particular part, I'm just being real honest, leaves me scratching my head a little bit about why they would be opposed. I've not heard from them an affirmative on this particular piece. I've certainly given them the language, encouraged them to look at it. We've had some discussion around this. I think in particular, if you're a CLEO, if you're managing, a law enforcement agency, that this kind of language strengthens your ability to strongly manage your personnel to make sure, who wouldn't want to make sure that their personnel aren't abiding by the very policies of which you swear an oath to, and which your local elected unit has created. So So I would think that they would be strongly supportive of this. But quite frankly, I've not heard, a solid affirmation from any of the three associations or others on this issue. If they're present, I would certainly welcome them to come forward and exchange their ideas and answer your question.
Thank you, Chair. I will give the opportunity, if any of those any members of those association or representatives are present, I will give you this opportunity to speak to this amendment or to this overall.
Chair Frazier, this is Bill Hutton again from the Minnesota Sheriff's Association.
Sheriff Hutton, go ahead.
All right. Well, since I'm the only one of the three associations that is here, I guess I kind of I drew the straw on this one. Here's the reality is, Chair Mariani, you are right on. We appreciate your open door. We appreciate having lively conversations, I might say at times. They're fun, but that's how we learn, right? About each other and about our positions. Well, the reality is we wholeheartedly agree that a policy, mandated policy on First Amendment assemblies needs to be there. Our main concern is to why are we putting it in this bill? This is a bill that needs to travel quickly. This is a bill that I know that the governor is interested in and others are interested in, but we are just a bit confused as to why we would put it in here. If we want to have those other discussions, right on, we're good with that, and we'll welcome those conversations, but we do not feel that because of all the other conversations that I'm sure we're going to have around post as the session moves forward, and it was last session, it's this session, I'm sure it's going to be sessions in the future, why we want to throw this particular policy or this particular amendment into the bill. But it's best I can do for you there, Chair.
Chair Mariani.
Representative or Chair Frazier, if others wish to weigh in, I mean, I think Representative Feist, now you understand a bit about why I couldn't answer straight up your question. I suspect that our good friend Sheriff Hutton and others do know and understand and appreciate the importance of being held accountable for good, sound public assembly response, which involves First Amendment rights. I don't think we need to go as far as to throw people under the bus on that, but I do think that the moment in which to respond to these issues isn't later, it's now. I hope not, members. I hope not, I really do. But we may be facing some really tough issues out in the public space in the coming months. And so the proposition that our public agents should comport themselves to their own department's present policies relative to these First Amendment protections, as well as other public assembly protocols, is not at all unusual or something that should be held off until later. We're talking $35 million of the state's resources, and I think the state needs to speak very strongly of what its expectations are in terms of the behavior, the conduct, and what we expect of our public agents who are licensed peace officers in our state.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Hollins, I will give you a moment to speak, and other members, I do want to move this along so that we can get the entire bill in front of us and we'll have further discussion. Representative Hollins.
Thank you so much, Chair. My question is for Chair Mariani, and I really appreciate this amendment. I think you are absolutely correct with $35 million hanging in the balance. It is our responsibility and duty to make sure there's accountability in what we are looking for from our public safety officials. My real question is centered around, and maybe this goes a little bit to what we were just talking about, I actually wanted to know about the dates in which we are requiring the post board to develop this model policy. You know, I mean, the governor is trying to push this through. There's all these folks who are on board to get this through as quickly as possible, and pushing out that comprehensive model until March 15th. You know, well, I guess by the end of the year, and then having them adopt it by March 15, 2022 is actually further out than I would like to see it. And I was just wondering if there was a method to, not the madness, but the reason why those particular dates were chosen.
Yeah, very quickly, Representative Hollins, Mr. Chair, we were following the model of the prior model, and it does take time to make sure that folks, you know, from different communities and perhaps opinions come together, work those things out. But that's a good quality process. I think we should adhere to that. But that's why the second part of the amendment, you know, where we're immediately saying that officers will be held to the standards that exist, that they pledge, you know, allegiance to in their own department. So that's the best we can do, and we know that virtually all departments have some policy, some standard. They're just not uniform and standardized across the state. So that's the way we deal with the need to make sure there's an immediate accountability as we build toward consensus on a broad framework for accountability.
Thank you.
Mariani. Thank you. We are getting pressed for time, but this is an important conversation. I do want to allow for members to talk. So I will go with Representative Pinto and Representative Johnson after that quickly, please.
And Mr. Chair, mine more relates to the underlying bill, and so I'll defer to that. But thank you.
Thank you. Representative Johnson. You're muted. You're muted, Representative Johnson. You're muted.
Chair, I believe Representative Raleigh was in front of me, and I believe he has questions on this amendment. Mine are more towards the whole bill. Other than I'd ask that I have been contacted by the three groups representing law enforcement, and they do not really care for this provision much at all that's being added on.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Raleigh.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question on this. Most of my questions were on the underlying bill, but I'll go quickly on this one. It says, by December 15, 2021, the board in consultation with the legislative councils of color, and then it goes on to list several others, and it says, and other interested parties must develop a comprehensive model policy. Is it the post board that will chair this particular policy development? And then what are the other interested parties? How do they register? Will the post board accept organizations that are in direct action campaigns like Action for Liberty and others? And I'd appreciate the answer, Mr. Chair.
Chair Mariani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question, Representative Raleigh. Yes, it would be overseen by the post board itself. They do have history with this. It's modeled after, as I said earlier, the sexual assault investigation model policy. The board will have the discretion to make that decision about who those others would be. We articulated or identified several that we think are important, but the discretion that would lie with the post board. It does also include our chiefs, our sheriffs, and our peace officers, the rank and file, if you will, a Peace Officers Association.
Thank you, Chair Mariani. I will now move us toward the vote. Chair Mariani moves amendment.
Chair Fraser, this is Representative Novotny. I've been waiting. I have just a brief comment, if you could just allow that, please.
Very brief, very brief. Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Chair Fraser. And it'll be a question directed at, or a comment directed at Chair Mariani. What's our end goal here? What is our end goal? We're looking at a request for $35 million to bail out the city of Minneapolis and possibly the city of St. Paul. And you're asking for someone from Little Fork, Minnesota to pay towards problems that will occur in one of two cities. And for the most part, the rest of the state says, yes, we want to, because if LTAC lights up and people need help, we want them to get help. I toured the burn site 3 or 4 days after the fires were out. I toured with Representative Gomez. I saw the pain in her eyes as she described calling 911 and not having anyone able to respond. How she took phone calls from her constituents and she had to tell her constituents there was no one to come help them. No one in the state of Minnesota should ever have that situation. That should be our overwhelming goal here. When we start saying we want $35 million, oh, and here's a bunch of, we need a policy to ensure that everyone follows their policies. And the policies are to follow the laws. And there's laws that we should follow the laws. Do we want every citizen in the state of Minnesota have the same level of expectation of protection, or do we not? Do you want this bill to pass or not? You've got the votes in this committee to push this through if you want. The question is, will you ever get the Senate to approve it? Let's have that fund. Let's keep this clean. Let's keep, if you want the 35 million, take it clean, but let's do that so it's there and we can start planning on that to hopefully prevent the kind of mass destruction that happened in the past. If someone calls, I pray that they get the same treatment that everyone else gets. And this A6 amendment will do nothing to help with that. If you, Chair Mariani, my request for you would be, please pull A6. There's many things that we can work on this, but there's already policies, there's already laws. If there's something, let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Novotny. Chair Mariani, do you wish to move forward with Amendment A6?
Mr. Chair, very quickly, I appreciate the comments. We can talk more at the end because I think it's the entire bill. To answer directly, this is not a Minneapolis-St. Paul or, Bemidji bill. This is a statewide bill. And as I said at the beginning, it's the dual purpose of making sure no physical harm comes to our public and to its property, and that we protect our First Amendment rights at the same time. So statewide bill to serve the entire state. And yes, Mr. Chair, I would like us to vote on the A.
Thank you, Chair Mariani. Chair Mariani moves to amend the A1 amendment with the A6 amendment. Clerk, you may take the roll.
Mariani,
Aye.
Frazier,
Aye.
Johnson,
No.
Edelson,
Aye.
Feist,
Aye.
Grosso, excused, Hollins,
Aye.
Hewitt,
Aye.
Cleaborn,
Aye.
Long,
Aye.
Lucero,
No.
Mueller,
No.
Novotny,
No.
O'Neill,
No.
Pinto,
Aye.
Poston,
No.
Raleigh,
No.
Vang,
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
11 ayes, 7 nays, 1 excuse.
With 11 ayes and 7 nays, 1 excuse, the A6 amendment to the A1 amendment is adopted. So now we have the A1 amendment as amended is now before the committee. I'd like to move to a vote, then discussion on the entire bill as amended. The motion before us to move to amend House 5445 with the A1 amendment as amended. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mariani,
Aye.
Frazier,
Aye.
Johnson,
No.
Edelson,
Aye.
Feist,
Aye.
Grosso, excused, Collins,
Pass.
Hewitt,
Aye.
Cleaborn,
Aye.
Long,
Aye.
Lucero,
No.
Mueller,
No.
Novotny,
No.
O'Neill,
No.
Pinto,
Aye.
Poston,
No.
Raleigh,
No.
Vang,
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
10 ayes, 7 nays, 1 excuse.
10 ayes, 7 nays, and 1 excuse. The A1 amendment as amended is adopted. We now have House File 445 as amended is now before the committee. I will now open it up for discussion. Representative Hewitt.
Sorry, I got to unmute myself. Can you hear me okay, Chair?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Members, I'll go quick here. This is where the tire hits the pavement for me. This is a very important bill. I thank Chair Mariani for taking it up. When people accuse me of not helping public safety or all the words used, it offends me greatly because this is my arena. This is where I'm from. And this bill is about that this helps out, because if you ever been on a scene, and I know many of you on this committee have, that you need mutual aid, you need it now, you need it then. And if it's not coming, you're gonna feel really left out, and that's happened to me too. The only question I have real quick though, and I don't know if the Commissioner Harrington's on or the Colonel, any way in shape or form does this bill take away any of the structure of incident command, that all stays intact? That's my understanding. Is that correct?
Commissioner Harrington or Colonel Langer?
Mr. Chair, Representative Hewitt, this bill is designed to work within unified command through the ICS structure. And that is in fact the structure that we're planning for the March trials, and that we have been using throughout the civil disturbances and the riots that we've been responding to throughout 2020 and as we move into 2021.
Mr. Chair, follow up and then I'll be done.
Representative Hewitt.
And that's exactly what I wanted to hear, Commissioner. And really, I encourage all of us to vote in support of this. This is where those blue signs in the front yard come to meet the pavement. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to Chair Mariani for bringing this bill forward. This is, I think, a very important bill to have for helping out our state in these really difficult times. And I appreciate also his leadership on the amendments to try to make sure that we're striking the right balance with this bill. I just wanted to respond to some of the comments about this being a Minneapolis bailout. That is not accurate. This bill does not apply only to Minneapolis. It's eligible for any community. And if it is in fact used in Minneapolis, I just wanted to point out that the individuals who have participated in some of the civil unrest in Minneapolis have come from not just around the country, but around the state. There were, for the arrests that took place from May to June, they came from 70 different cities across the state of Minnesota, including 3 who came from Big Lake, which I believe is Representative Novotny's district. So we've had folks coming into Minneapolis and St. Paul and others causing havoc in the cities. And certainly there have been folks from Minneapolis as well, but this is not related to a single community, but a single community in many instances has felt the impacts of the actions from around the state and from around the country. We had a Boogaloo Boys member from Texas. We had 2 white supremacists, one from New Brighton, one from North Carolina. We had a member of the Aryan Cowboys who set the first fire, white supremacist group, despite comments made in this committee that there were not white supremacists in the past. So I just want to put this in context that these are concerns that should be broadly felt for the entirety of the state, for the impacts that they've had in our communities, and we've had participation from around the state. So I think it's appropriate for this to be a state resourced answer to the problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, but please, can I respond to that? Because I was completely taken out of context, and that is not what was said in this committee when I was finally allowed to address
Just
that
a moment,
question.
Representative O'Neill. Representative O'Neill, just a moment. Representative Hollins, I'll come back to you, Representative O'Neill.
You will, because that didn't happen.
Representative Hollins.
I meant to lower my hand from earlier. I apologize. It's not up.
Representative O'Neill, please. Representative O'Neill.
Yep, I just had to unmute. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to address that really quickly. All I said was that the NAACP had said that white supremacists had burned down Minneapolis and St. Paul. She did not say that there were a handful of people that were among a lot of different people that burned down Minneapolis and St. Paul, to which I said that there is no evidence that only white supremacists came to Minneapolis and St. Paul and burned it down. So please don't take me out of context. Representative Long, I'd appreciate that if you're going to quote me that you would actually be accurate. I was just saying that there is no evidence, whether it was in the newspapers or other, that only white supremacists came here and burned down Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Thank you, Representative
Thank you
O'Neill.
for that, and I appreciate accuracy moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative O'Neill. Just committee members, hang with me. My staff is telling me we want to make sure we were clear on the last motion that we voted on. So staff, could you please read back to me the last motion that we voted on, just to make sure we got that, we voted correctly.
So the last motion we voted on was the motion to move the A1 amendment as amended. I would recommend that we reconsider that motion and just do a voice vote to move that before the committee properly, if possible. Actually, I would defer to council if Jeff possibly could weigh in.
Council.
This is Jeff Diebold. I thought you had articulated the motion properly, Mr. Chair, but if the committee administrator believes.
Oh, I would defer to Jeff.
Yeah, I felt like you articulated that you were moving on the motion as amended, but if there is concern about that,
thank you, Council.
Consider it.
No, thank you, Council. We will defer to your council. Thank you. We'll move forward. Representative Johnson.
Chair Fraser, Chair Mariani, members. I had, going way back to the beginning, when I had some questions for Chief Harrington, or Commissioner Harrington, dealing with the original concept of this bill. I'm not sure if he's still here or not, but it's something for us to consider. It was unfortunate that the city of Minneapolis did not, and I repeat, did not do what statutory requirements of them to do under Chapter 12 for the emergency that occurred there. Now, we had some extenuating circumstances. We had multiple different agencies asking for different agencies asking for the mutual aid. I know Anoka County asked for mutual aid to help in their county, and that in particular officer that was in doing mutual aid in Anoka County ended up down in Minneapolis. And that wasn't Minneapolis' responsibility. But the city of Minneapolis, the Minnesota State Patrol, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, all made mutual aid requests. And under Minnesota Chapter 12.33, whichever agency made the request, that agency is required by statute to compensate the different departments that responded. We already have a statute that requires that. So we ended up paying backfilling the state patrol, who came at the request of Minneapolis, over $11 million that the city of Minneapolis actually owes to the state of Minnesota, under 12.33. So that's a little frustrating. I think some of these sheriffs and some of these police chiefs and us legislators as well weren't aware of that. And I know it's tough on Minneapolis budget. They cut their police department that much and cut 121 officers, so they don't even have the officers they need to properly protect their citizens right now. And we have an issue with the trial coming up. So I have some concerns with this bill. I know I wasn't thrilled with it because the only way it can be used is either 12.31, I believe, or 12.29, which is either local or state emergency. So we have the issue of, yes, are they called quite a few times down in Minneapolis, especially with civil unrest and riots? But they're not called very often in greater Minnesota. In fact, in my county, I've lived there 60 years. It's never been called one in there. Up in Roseau, they've had floods, but they've never had needed extra law enforcement. So this wouldn't apply. Moorhead, same issue. All across the state in greater Minnesota, we have issues that come up, but we don't need, where we have mutual aid, but they would not qualify under this issue because it wouldn't be something
Johnson,
like this.
we are.
I know we're running out of time.
And we do have other members that I would like to give them the opportunity to speak.
Yeah. But what happened now with this amendment put on there, that really made a problem with this bill. That's going to areas that not going to happen. I'm not voting for this. I had trouble voting for it in the past because it's basically taking funds from greater Minnesota to pushing them down into the metro area where the Minneapolis Police Department is not doing their duties.
Thank you.
In the
Thank you,
Minneapolis City Council. I am not done yet.
Representative Johnson, we are running out of time. Representative Johnson, there are other members that I'd like to give the opportunity to talk, and we are running out of time. We have to vote on the bill. So thank you, Representative Johnson.
If you could,
Representative Novotny.
Respond.
I'd like to respond just to the crack that was taken at me. If you want to be exact, I know because I was still working when this was going on, that two of the members that you mentioned from Big Lake might have a Big Lake address, but they live in Becker Township, so they're Representative Mecklen's if you want to be exact. The other point I was just going to make is, yes, it is a bailout bill because as Representative Johnson has pointed out, in absence of this bill, we go back to 1233 or 12.33. So it would be Minneapolis's responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just briefly, I'm in support, of course, of the bill, but I just want to make a comment about the letter that was sent by the law enforcement associations in support of the bill, and certainly appreciate the substance of that. But I was concerned by a paragraph in the letter and just wanted to call this out. And this is as somebody who has worked very closely with those associations, with the leaders of the associations. Appreciate them very much. I had the chance to work with them many times. And as somebody who was a prosecutor of gender violence, I worked very closely with so many fine officers. And I was so concerned by the use of the language and calling out in that letter this point about members' concern relating to, quote, demonization of law enforcement officers, et cetera. And I just really want to encourage all of us. And I know in this committee, we are going to be engaging in debate and have been, and certainly will continue to in all kinds of ways and about rhetoric and all kinds of things. But really want to encourage that as we're having that discussion, I feel like some of those points do not end up being helpful, don't move things along. And I have to say that as somebody who looks at language like that, I'm only bringing this up because it's public, it's posted on our website, et cetera, to paraphrase this from the perspective of my constituents, that my constituents remain concerned that no matter what legislation is passed, that the treatment of different communities in my constituency may be different and not be what the public may expect. And that's due to continued disparate treatment by certain individuals at certain levels. And I understand we're only calling that out. And I really, Mr. Chair and members, would like to encourage all of us to engage in rhetoric in a way that recognizes that we have some big problems to deal with and we need to be dealing with them together. And I hope that we can continue to do that. And I don't find that sort of language to be helpful.
Thank you, Representative Pinto. We do have to move to a vote. Would the author like to make any final comments before we take the vote?
Mr. Chair, just super brief. This bill is about supporting public safety. It's about supporting law enforcement. It's about supporting our First Amendment rights. That's what this bill is about, and it applies to the entire state of Minnesota. I appreciate your support.
Thank you.
So I would, Chair, renew my motion that House File 445 as amended be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
Motion moved. Clerk, please take the vote.
Mariani,
Aye.
Frazier,
Aye.
Johnson,
No.
Edelson,
Aye.
Feist,
Aye.
Grossel, excused, Hollins,
Pass.
Hewitt,
Aye.
Cleburne,
Aye.
Long,
Aye.
Lucero,
No.
Mueller,
No.
Novotny,
No.
O'Neill,
Absolutely not.
Pinto,
Aye.
Poston,
No.
Raleigh,
No.
Vang,
Aye.
Zhang,
Pass.
nine ayes, 7 nays, 1 excused.
9 ayes and 7 nays, 1 excused. House File 445 as amended has been referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question of parliamentary procedure. This is Raleigh.
Mr. Raleigh, we are out of time. This committee stands adjourned.